Welcome to the Future Minds Accelerator panel on the jobs of the future, brought to you by Rio Tinto, Blue Chile, and Amazon Web Services, with thanks to Venture Cafe for hosting the event tonight. Our moderator this evening is Dr. Tim McDonald. He is the former CEO of Generation One at Minderoo Foundation and former Executive Director of Western Australia Catholic Education, where he is responsible for 163 schools and more than 75,000 students. He is now Director of Charlie Consulting, working with education leaders to enable them to lead for change. Tim, the panel is yours.
Thank you, Pete. And also we pay our respects to our traditional custodians of the land here in Western Australia, where I'm from, and that's the Whadjuk Noongar clan. So thank you for that. And welcome everyone to a wonderful conversation tonight about the future of work and future jobs. And I feel intimidated by the calibre of the panel that we're with, and hopefully you will experience their insights in a range of fields of expertise. So maybe we'll start off, panel, and let's start off with a gentle question first up for anyone. A lot's changed over the last 6 months in terms of how we work and certainly where we work. How have you seen work evolve, and what skills and abilities have been important to that shift?
Okay, I might jump in. Hi, everybody. My name's Mark I'm coming to you sort of live and sort of well from Washington State, USA, where I work for Microsoft Education. My background is from Australia as an educator, as a school leader, and also working in non-profits focused on capacity building for schools and systems. I guess when we look at the last 6 months, I'd start just by recognising that, we're smack bang in the middle of an economic, a humanitarian, and a public health crisis. And the perspective I bring is obviously around the changes that we've seen with education, which is smack bang in the middle of that landscape. Globally, we've had 1.7 billion students since March globally shift to some form of remote and distance learning. And for teachers' work, that's dramatically changed over the last 3 to 4 months. We've had that, and we've seen this sudden shift to remote learning delivery, which in the short term was largely about getting communications up and getting content out, whether it's by radio, TV, physical packs, or online platforms. And then we've seen this shift, this kind of fluid movement, as people start to reimagine what a return might look like, or what learning might look like if it's no longer constrained by time and place and those structures that we've been used to for hundreds of years. In terms of the skill shift, certainly mindset and social and emotional skills, emotional intelligence has risen starkly to the top as being critical both for the teachers and the young people that they serve. That ability to self-regulate, self-manage, to be able to make decisions, maintain perspective, hold a positive, optimistic growth mindset or a beginner's mindset has been really important in dealing with ambiguity, complexity, and change that have been pushed upon people. So I guess what we're seeing right at the moment, today here in America, a large number of states are going back for the first time, either remotely, a hybrid model, or physically, which is going to be an interesting day here today in the USA. But teachers, in a sense, the shift for them is rebuilding learning. They've always known, like in Australia, that learning is socially embedded, is experiential, and is participatory. We've always known that. The research backs it up. Redesigning, reimagining learning for that to happen wholly or partially in online spaces, leveraging digital, is the fundamental shift that we're seeing right at the moment. Back to you.
Thank you, Mark. Other panelists?
I suppose I can jump in there. I'm Kim Flintoff. I'm the Learning Futures Advisor at Curtin University, and had the pleasure of working with Tim in the past at another university. But But I suppose here in Western Australia, we're a little bit different to the rest of the world. I've got colleagues in the US, I've got family in the UK, and I know that they've been locked down since February through to, some of them are still just emerging now. And Mark alluded to schools going back today. Now, here in Western Australia, it was for many schools, it was little more than a 2-week blip in proceedings. There was a lot of frustration and a lot of flurry of activity trying to sort of mobilise for the potential for having to shut everything down and transform the way that we were going to engage with students. And then as it panned out, because the way that the pandemic was managed here in Western Australia, we've sort of become a little outpost where the health impacts have been far less of a concern than they have been in other parts of the world. What I did start to see was that I'd been involved for years in teaching academics at university, teaching teachers in schools about the use of technology in their classrooms and those sorts of things. And there was this rapid realization that using technology in the classroom is a very different undertaking than trying to engage people in a remote setting. And that sort of came as a case of shock and awe, I think, for a lot of teachers, in that they were just completely overwhelmed by how to engage in a really sort of significant way. So that 2 weeks was really just sort of finding their feet. And by the time the holidays landed, they came back from holidays, and then everyone's talking about going back and having everyone back at their desks in school. And that's what I've seen as a parent. I've seen that happen as an educator working with schools. I've seen that happen, and certainly at university we're starting to see that happening as well. So the ways of working, I think, have really shifted to thinking a lot more about the future and preparation. So this notion of being prepared to adapt and mitigate against any future impacts is certainly a lot more on the radar than it was before. What I found with working with students and teachers in a practical sense is that there's a real desire for students to have a say in what's going on, because in the early days of the pandemic, students were just told what was going to happen to them. And we started working on some programs to try and give students a voice in what was going on. And the state government here in Western Australia opened up an ideas management platform that was intended for the people of Western Australia to bring their ideas to the platform to share. And it was a crowdsourcing of ideas of possible solutions, possible pathways through and beyond the demands of COVID. And we put forward the idea that why don't we bring student voice to that? We ended up piloting with an activity with 22 schools and over 700 kids, trying to find solutions for Professor Fiona Wood working in her hospitals and her hospital theatre environment to make it safer for everyone concerned. And classic, the cat always decides to jump up when that happens. The reality was that kids started to have this idea, and people started looking through at what we were doing. So we had multiple ministries represented, multiple directorates in government, all sorts of education sectors looking forward, saying, how can we mobilise this as an ongoing way of working? And I think that's sort of one of the key things that's come out is there's this real embracing, sort of design thinking approaches, student engagement. All of those things have really come to the fore with a very meaningful approach, and a bit of a shift away from the very familiar teacher delivery model that we've seen previously. So they're the key things that have sort of stood out for me so far.
Kim, that's a good segue to how work is actually shifting, or new jobs. And maybe we'll ask Donna, what sort of new jobs or new roles has AWS created recently, and how did you choose the right people for them?
Yeah, thanks. Donna Edwards here, so Partner Manager for Amazon Web Services and also CEO of a startup called Shoutout. Thanks for having me today. What I've been seeing is a lot more roles becoming specialised and deeper vertically in order to better support customers. And that's just because the breadth of technology is just growing and growing so rapidly. It's harder than ever for people to be across the breadth of all the different services and technologies. So areas like machine learning, IoT, and along the same lines, specializations within verticals and industries is becoming more common as well. So, some industries have particular nuances around your finance or mining. So we've been seeing a lot of those specialization type of roles happening. Second part of the question, in terms of choosing the right people, we have a fairly full-on interview process at AWS, and for us it's about focusing on hiring people that can demonstrate our 14 leadership principles. So for anyone that hasn't seen those leadership principles, they're pretty cool. You can Google them. But things like, customer obsession, ownership, deliver results. So, really focusing on those types of values-based hiring, which can really lead to more diversity in teams as well when you hire that way.
I'll just throw that back to you, Mark. I just wonder, in your role, and certainly in the big corporation that you work with, those leadership qualities or the qualities that AWS have, what are some of the qualities that you look for in employing people for education worldwide?
Yeah, I guess if I look at it even more broadly than education worldwide, because what we do when we staff is we staff for Microsoft, recognizing that as people enter any industry, they're likely to move around there from, like I started in sales, strangely enough, in education, but now I'm in education marketing. I guess the one I'd like to pick up in is something that Donna said, which I think is really important, is sort of this focus around diversity of our workforce and inclusion. Diversity on one hand is an easy thing to achieve. You just get a tick on a scorecard for having certain types of people. Inclusion is a different sort of narrative. I liken it to this way. Diversity is being invited to the party. Inclusion is being asked to dance. So one of the things that I guess if I just call out a couple of things that we have, one is, which I think is really super interesting, is we have an autism employment program that's been running for a number of years that, specifically attracts, recruits, onboards and develops people with who are on the autistic spectrum. And you have these amazing success stories. There's this young man called Philip Jarvis who landed his dream job in HoloLens, and he writes and blogs about what it's like to have Asperger's and be working in one of the world's largest tech companies in a space that is his passion. And it's the ability that he brings to the role, which is why he has the role, not because of the scorecard that needed to be ticked. Or we have a disability help desk that runs 24/7. That, shock horror, is staffed 100% with the people who live the experience of that disability every day. So there's a number of kind of features that we see across the company geared up around ensuring that our workforce itself fully represents the customer and the client base that we serve. That way, we deeply understand, as we're building products and services, who we're building those products and services for, because they're being built. The Seeing AI app is being partially built by people who have vision impairments. So yeah, that just sharing that example of, I guess, how we're staffing to ensure diversity of perspectives.
Thank you, Mark. And diversity of perspectives, or looking at the future. If I go to you, Yinzhu, part of your role at Rio Tinto's Pioneer Lab, and you might want to just explain what the Pioneer Lab is. It is to look into the future and then all prepare for it. What changes do you see coming down the track from your work in the lab?
Yep, no worries. So my name is Yinzhu Quan, coming from Rio Tinto 4.0 Pioneer Lab. So we have one job, is try to reimagine Rio Tinto and reimagine the mining industry in 2030 and beyond. So 2030 sounds very long time in advance. However, it's only 10 years from now. And thinking about 10 years ago, who would have thought Uber could disrupt the taxi industry, and who would have thought Netflix could have disrupted TV industry? So mining we have been in a certain format in a long time, in very long time, and we know we are going through very exponential changes as an industry, and we wanted to somehow try to reimagine ourselves before getting disrupted. So after saying that, we are basically a team of doing future studies of the future, And funny enough, you asked that, Tim. In the future studies, we always tell people future is not predictable. But don't forget, the purpose of doing your future studies is try to prepare ourselves for the future. So how can we still survive even after we accept the future is not predictable? Then very easily we should shift our focus on adaptability or resilience. So instead of thinking about, okay, what kind of jobs is going to exist in the future, let's ask ourselves, how can we be more adaptable to the future? How can we quickly upgrade our skills when it's required in the future? So if you look into the history of all the industrial revolutions, you will see each time there's a panic about loss of the jobs. So farmers are panic about those steam engines, or the big machines are taking away their jobs. But actually, what actually happened is those technology actually created more jobs than people could ever imagine. So I don't have kids now, but if I'm going to do some career advice to my kids, I don't know what I'm going to say to them, because the jobs probably don't exist today. So what's the solution there? Key message we always give to people is the lifetime learning, because you will need to accept the fact that the skills need to be upgraded very soon, or much quicker than today. So we say, for example, what we call soft skills at the moment could become a core skills. So let's say critical thinking, communication, complex problem-solving skills, because machines are really good at solving complicated issues. So the issues that needs more brain powers, that needs more hours, machines can learn 24/7. However, they're not very good at solving complex issues, which requires creativity and imaginations. So those skills that we call it soft skills now, very soon it will become a core skills. So let's talk more about skills rather than jobs when we talk about the future.
Thank you. And I wonder, excuse me, I wonder, Kim, talking of those, excuse me, cluster of skills that Yinzhu was talking about, those cluster of skills that lead to an adaptability to change. In learning futures, what are the skills that you see schools trying to develop, the core skills, these soft skills, etc.? What's the conversation in your network around learning futures, around skills that lead to an adaptability for the future?
Yeah, I think there's that notion of, I think about it in terms of capabilities or attributes. When I look at the national curriculum, I was really excited when it first landed, and there was the general capabilities were there, and I had this vision that they would be the heart of everything, and that all the other learning pedagogy and the content would be wrapped around learner development. Sadly, that didn't happen straight away, but I think we're starting to get a swing towards that sort of understanding and that sort of insight now. I see a whole range of different models and of practice and capabilities being addressed by, sorry, I've got an invasive feline. I see a lot of different models of practice. So there's, every university has its graduate capabilities. The ACARA has its general capabilities. You've got the International Baccalaureate with its approaches to learning and those things, and they all articulate a general sort of frame. Professor David Gibson and I went back a couple of years ago to look at something that we called future-ready attributes, and we went back to research and saying, what are the core concepts and the core ideas that we can find evidence and research for the concept, and how can we map those against? And I've put the link in the chat there. We came up with what we called the future-ready attributes, and they're essentially what Yinzhu was just talking about. There's communication, there's collaboration, there's problem-solving, personal learning, and global perspective. So the 5 areas that we sort of identified, and we went through a process of mapping those against all the others. So we can actually see that there's a through line across a lot of those sort of areas. A lot of the work that we see happening in schools now around design thinking programs, around hackathons and maker spaces, and all sorts of other ways of working in the classroom are largely about surfacing those skills and capabilities, and that we're almost at the point where some teachers are more comfortable letting learning lead and mapping back to curriculum demands, as opposed to having the curriculum being the sort of the usual sort of drag everyone through the very narrow curriculum hoop. The eye of the curriculum, you might want to think about it. So content knowledge is obviously really important, but if it can actually be done in the context of student interest, student relevance, and all those sorts of things, and focus on developing the learner as much as developing the test scores, I think there's a lot to be said in that sort of space. And that's what I'm seeing reflected in the discussions that we're having with our industry members in the network as well, is industry members are looking more and more for capabilities. They want to bring somebody into the organisation who will have diverse roles over time, who can adapt to the changing nature. We're hearing about large organisations referring to themselves now as learning organisations. They don't mean they're a school or a university. They mean that they're an organisation that adapts to the needs of their client base. And that is changing the conversation, I think, that's happening in schools. We're moving away slowly from talking about destination endpoints, I will be this job title or that job title, and actually starting to turn a lot of those job titles into verbs and actions. And so that you don't necessarily become an engineer anymore, but you become someone who does engineering. And that might reveal itself in a very different sort of role than the traditional sort of civil engineer or electrical engineer type roles that we've seen in the past. But engineering can be applied to social development, it can be applied to education, it can be applied to all sorts of other areas. And that conversation is slowly happening and slowly evolving. And when we're starting to see industry more interested in talking about collaboration and partnership as a consequence of that.
Kim, and there's a question from Madeline on the chat there. I'll give you a chance to read that because if you can solve that, that would be really good in the conversation. I'll just move on to, I do want to come back to Donna at some stage because of those future-ready skills or taking people in from an education that might not have highly developed soft skills or core skills. How do you onboard them to meet what you need in AWS so that they're actually active contributors to what they're doing? Do you have to have special transitions, pathways, or special sort of onboarding when they come into AWS?
We have a pretty lengthy and detailed onboarding program. So we have a lot of technical onboarding, but then we also have a lot of soft skills and leadership skills training that we run internally. So most people will do a minimum of 3 months full-time onboarding programs, and some of them can go as high as 6 months. And then we also have programs for more junior people as well coming on, where they'll do a 12-month program. So there's a lot of time spent on upskilling. And I think just touching on some of the Kim's conversation around that culture of safe to fail. I think one of the biggest things is around allowing people to have time to experiment and to innovate. One of the things I really love about what we do at AWS is the 2 pizza team model. So the small teams where we've got end-to-end ownership and delivery, and we can experiment and we can innovate. And if we fail, it's okay. We learn from it and we keep moving. So I think that's one of the challenges for the education sector, is how do we bring in that, making sure that people can innovate and experiment and that it is safe to fail. It's not just about the score or the result at the end of the day.
Mm. Well, that's an amazing task. That's almost a revision of K right through to 12, and certainly teacher attitudes and etc. Mark, you mentioned the McKinsey report, the 2030 report there, and identified that for people to read because it has amazing resources there. I know that your company's put a lot into it. I want to look at the OECD report. I know that Kim mentioned the Learning Organisation, which also comes from the OECD. I wrote the report envisioning the future of education and jobs. And in that, they said, it's our responsibility as concerned adults to help our children get ready for their future. I wonder if you can tell us what's happening in the education world or practice and education technology space that's helping achieve that for these young people in the future.
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, a few things there, and it's been really interesting listening to Donna and Yinzhu and Kim, just in the congruence and the consistency of, of what I've been hearing. Certainly one of those is around understanding what the coming trends are, and that comes through the paper. So, as an organisation, essentially what we're doing is either engaging in, I call it the 3 C's, curating, commissioning, or creating research and insights to try to best understand this highly kind of dynamic landscape where the world of work, and the world of education and the world of civic society all come together. And where is it that technology can play a role to help create first-class humans and not second-class robots? You know, so part of what we do in the education space in Microsoft is, you know, understand and recognize that the provision of innovative devices and platforms and things does not make a single difference to teacher practice, and does not make a single difference largely to learning unless it's wrapped around with a whole end-to-end sort of change management process, a transformation framework, one that recognizes that culture, capacity building, the right point and time of support for teachers and leaders is put in place with it. So one of the things that I think that I see that we do is, number one, is to understand those trends. You know, aging population, the mobility of populations globally. You know, it's great. Let's say, you know, WA is navigating COVID crisis. Great for our entrepreneurs and our innovators. You know, with that global mindset, we've got to recognise this massive supply-demand chain of both human and physical resources across the globe that are in this constant state of tension. You know, as a society, we're now hyper-connected. You know, our problems are shared problems, but our solutions are shared solutions as well. So what we do is, you know, in and around this agenda of the you know, the future of work, is understand the trends, engage in the research. You mentioned the class of 2030 and life ready learning, to understand what's the deal right now, not in some fixed point future, you know. And Yinzhu, you know, correctly kind of flagged that as being fictitious. You know, the opportunity in education is to develop in young people the skills and the dispositions to craft their preferred future, not to prepare them for a future, not to make them future ready. You know, there's that quote that I always misquote, you know, the best way to predict the future is to create it, which fits in nicely here. So we do this great research with groups like McKinsey, and we find out that right now, employers, for example, 58% of them say that new hires and graduates are ill prepared for the world of work today. And when we asked 6,000 young people around this particular gap in social and emotional skills in the workforce today, 50% of them said completely agree. So then we go further and we explore with the economist social and emotional skills across the globe, and we start to find there's this massive tension, this supply-demand issue around skills that were once considered ornamental but are now fundamental. And one of the speakers had already said, it could have been Donna or Yinzhu or Kim, I'm not sure, you know, AI can do a lot of things, but there's a lot of things that only humans can do. I mean, AI still can't fold a fitted sheet, but then again, nobody can. So I guess we're equal there. Yeah, so not to go on too far into that space, but what we then do is we see there's this gap, whether it's a gap in STEM skills for girls in Europe, or there's an alarming gap in social and emotional skills. Where does tech come into play with that? Well, it turns out technology plays a fundamental role, because it's through technology that young people make sense of their world, and it's also through technology that they contribute positively and purposefully to their world. And one of the ways we develop social and emotional skills is through feedback and through socially embedded learning. So we develop tools, programs, we take those things that people know and use already, and then we work out how can we help teachers fold social and emotional learning inside what they're already doing. Can we add emoji keyboards to Word? Can we add a social and emotional learning sticker pack in OneNote? It might sound trivia, but when they're informed by global research around the big 5 characteristics, personality traits, suddenly you got this powerful environment, especially where lots of people are online now. You know, we've just released in GitHub for everybody to use, open source, a feature called Reflect, which allows people, if they're using Teams in their organization or their school, doesn't matter, it allows them to take an emotional pulse, answer the question, how is Donna feeling? How is my class feeling? How is my school feeling? How is my system feeling right now? So there's some examples, Tim.
Thank you. Yinzhu, I want to go to you because Mark was very much obviously future focused in the response. What did you agree with, like what Mark said, and anything there that challenged the work that you're doing in the Pioneer Lab?
No, I was smiling loudly and quietly when he said the future is not predictable and the best way of predict it is create it. And that's definitely one of the things that we learned in the early stage of this journey. So there's, I think, about 30 different methodologies about future studies, and one of them is actually called personal future approach. So, individually you can have an imagination of what your future could look like, and we can have a collective view of that. You got me excited, but let's not talk too deeper into the future studies. And another thing we always say is let's humanize the future, not futurize the human. And Mark mentioned that, let's not try to force prepare the students of the future, and I can't agree more. Human is always going to be the center of whatever we do. And I learned greatly through how Mark describing how to, what's the word you used? How to put the emotional feedbacks into the things that teachers are already doing. It's just great. I didn't know that before this panel discussion. So thank you very much.
Thank you. And looking at the chat down there, it's education and the education system, classrooms and teachers are getting a few comments. And so I'm going to put a question to you, Kim, and then we might actually come back to possibly to Eddie and respond to that comment there. But Kim, this is the magic wand question. This is think big. This is a free kick, if you like. We know that the Education Council report, looking in the future, and Professor Peter Shergold says that the ATAR should be regarded as just one important measure of success. And there's much discussion around the future of ATAR, and COVID has certainly contributed to that conversation. And we're coming out of this crisis. There is an opportunity for change, both in reviews in New South Wales, in the CARA looking at things, etc. If you had a magic wand, or you were Dan Tian, what opportunities would you look into for preparing young Australians for jobs of the future?
It's interesting because the Shergold report was actually sent to me by a Year 11 student in a meeting I had the other day. And he was sitting on the other side of the table, and he pulled out his phone and said, "You need to read this report." So I think kids are already sort of on the page of, they know what sort of future they want to see, and they know some of the sort of changes. Most of us know from all sorts of news reports and just from engaging with our own friends and family and watching kids go through school that the Year 11 and 12 experience hasn't been the most edifying and exciting period of study. I've always sort of wondered why Year 11 and 12 shouldn't be sort of the celebratory capstone of all those years of investment in education, whereas for many students, as we saw a few years ago, I mean, the stats of kids with mental health concerns and with stress and anxiety was getting into the 30-40% level. Any other industry and any other sort of type of human activity would have a royal commission as to why that's going on and the activity be suspended. Yet we sort of took it in our stride as an education system and said it was just how it goes. Increasingly, we're seeing that the social emotional side of things is key. Kids are understanding that themselves. But I think in terms of where it's headed in terms of and I relate this to one of the questions I saw in the chat, the notion of qualifications. There's a lot of factors around, as we know from working in universities, a lot of factors around accreditation of professions and all sorts of things. So it's all well and good. Yes, you need a certain set of evidence of learning and capability to get into university, to study medicine, to graduate from medicine, to become a doctor. But also along the way, there's all sorts of industry bodies and professional bodies that say what some of those benchmarks are and what some of those accrediting criteria are. And those sort of things don't often get factored into public conversations around education. So I think that's one part of it, is making a lot of that side of things more transparent. But I also think we can actually open the door to a lot more kids. I really sort of go back to Seymour Papert and Mitch Resnick's idea of you have a low a low floor, a wide door, and a high ceiling. So let as many people in as possible, leave it as open as possible for people to explore. And this reflects what Donna and Yinzhu were saying as well. And the low barriers to entry, high expectations and no caps on what you can achieve. And that's from a social emotional perspective. I think kids are really inspired by that sort of idea, that they can go in, have a go, not be too concerned about tripping up here and there, that it's all part of the process. I think around qualifications, we're going to start to see smaller and smaller chunks of evidence. The micro-credentialing, the nano-credentialing, the badges, all those sorts of things will start changing the way that we formulate a qualification. And there was a lot of suggestion in some of those AQF reviews around what a degree structure should look like, what a postgraduate qualification should look like, and then all those continuing professional learning requirements. I don't see why, and we've done some work just recently with, we opened the door to first year units of study at our university for kids from years 10 to 12 in high school. And in some of those cases, we saw kids in year 10 topping the class against undergraduate students who had already been through year 11 and 12 and into their first year of study. So this whole idea of identifying capability and letting people rise to whatever level they're capable of, I think, is another big shift that needs to happen. I think we're also looking at modifications to the apprenticeship model of degree that's happening. I've seen it reported in the UK, where you get recruited by a company and they support your ongoing learning and development, not only for their individual needs, but also with your own perspectives and your own goals in mind as well. So you can still have the vision of, I want to become an engineer of some sort, but within the context of an organization who supports you through the particular needs that they have, but with your own vision of your own growth as well. So that personalization and humanization of learning, I think, is another big aspect. I don't think we find much consensus anywhere that standardized testing and those sorts of things is a good thing. None of us like it. None of us seem to value it very much, except for people who like single factor variables, that there's a single number on a page that can tell me something. It doesn't tell me very much, but at least I can put kids in a big long straight line and know who's the top and who's at the bottom and where everyone's ranked in between. But it's the evidence of learning and the evidence of capability and the evidence of students' particular strengths and interest as a driver in their own learning. I mean, we know that some of the most disengaged kids in our education systems are also the most intelligent and capable kids. They've just not given something that they're interested in to work on. And as a consequence, they just say, why should I waste my time? That whole process of, and we've been experimenting with that with some of the programs that we've been running through the Learning Futures Network over the last few years, and in partnerships with schools and industry, is helping kids set up their own hoops to jump through, and not just the teacher hoop. So these are the things that I want to achieve, and these are the directions that I want to go, and I want to have a voice in my own future. I don't just want to jump through the hoops until year 12 and then sort of enter into that real world of adulthood. I think the connectedness of schools and industry and community is essential for moving forward, and that we have to find much more effective ways to evidence the learning. I've always said that curriculum is not a student's concern. It's actually a device and a mechanism for educators and for education systems, and we shouldn't be just trying to squeeze kids through sort of the cheese grater of curriculum. We actually should be able to let kids get out there to learn, engage in things that they're really passionate and committed to, and then draw the lines back to saying, yes, we can see there's the evidence that they've engaged with the content that's required. They can demonstrate the skills and capabilities that are required, but it's done on their own terms to some extent. It's a big ask for a lot of teachers, but we're starting to show that it's actually by letting go of some of the standard ways of doing things, you can make room for a lot of these things to occur.
I'd love to add 2 cents, Tim, if I've got time, on the qualification question. Totally agree with everything that Kim said around the micro qualifications especially. And I might be a bit biased because I left school after year 10, so I went straight into the workforce and didn't go to university till I was in my 30s because I chose to at that stage. And I've spent a lot of time recruiting a lot of STEM roles. And I guess graduate roles can be really, really competitive. And I think that's something that a lot of young people worry about, the competition side of am I going to get the job? How am I going to get one up over the next person applying? And I think what I've seen is that if students can show that they've created or built something, it will often beat a qualification. But even better, if you can pair building something or creating something with one of a smaller qualification, then it's a massive advantage. So that's just what I've seen in the workforce.
No, thank you, Donna. Thank you very much. I know Pete's going to come back very shortly and say our time is nearly up. So before he does that, I want to jump in and give every panel member a minute or so just to either sum up their view on the future, or what advice would you give to school-age students about preparing for jobs of the future, post-school, becoming a flourishing human being in the next generation? What would you say? What advice would you give? And everyone has a minute or so.
If I only have one message to give, I would say have a purposeful career. So go beyond the job. So I'm a mining engineer by trade. So instead of thinking about, okay, I'm going to be a mining engineer, let's think about what kind of contributions I'm going to make to the world, and how am I going to add values to my community? What kind of pain points I'm going to solve for the people? So take mining engineering, for example. If we're just talking about moving a pile of dirt from A to B, then the machines or the softwares can do way better job than I do. However, if I'm thinking about my contribution to the world, then I'll be thinking, okay, what's the best, safe and productive, and most importantly, sustainable way of mining or moving dirt from A to B? Then the machines again can do the calculations, but they cannot do the step change. So they cannot think about, okay, how am I going to think about the routes, but also thinking about the carbon emissions and all that. So even if you come to a stage that machines can do all the calculations for you, don't forget your purpose is to solve a certain problem. Then you'll be thinking about, okay, how am I going to do this better and better? Then you just naturally will upgrade your skills, because sometimes you can lose a job. I got redundant twice in my life, but actually ended up with a better and bigger opportunities. But you will not lose your purpose, but you can do a few different jobs. So how do you get a purposeful career? I think you've got to ask a lot of why. Why do you want to do this? Why do you want to do this? Ask a lot of whys until you come to a point that the question just really excites you. It almost like you wanted to do this even if you don't get paid. And once you get that stage, you will have a mission and you will have a career no matter what happens in this world.
Yinzhu, thank you very much. Other panel members?
Yeah, okay, off to you, Mark.
Oh, did I breathe?
Sorry.
I'll keep it short. I guess my takeaway message would be, that emotions matter, that the world of work, the world of schooling is an emotional roller coaster. My advice would be for young people to invest in developing emotional intelligence, because emotions are the gatekeeper to cognition, to attention, and to motivation. In a sense, they unlock the possibility. You can be anything. You can be the smartest, the fastest, the quickest. You could also be the kind kid. Again, the future of work, of learning and life is profoundly human. So my advice would be develop your emotional intelligence and be the kind kid.
Thank you, Mark. Much appreciated. Kim?
Yeah, I think the catch cry of this last 6 months, we're all in this together, is probably where I'd come from, is that notion that it's really emphasized just how connected we are, just how reliant on each other we are, and just how responsible we need to be for each other. And it links to both what Yinzhu and Mark were saying, is that requires a certain social and emotional maturity to be able to really truly embrace that. And I think anyone and any organisation that isn't connected and isn't contributing is probably more or less irrelevant for the future. And I think that's probably enough, is, you know, connect and contribute.
Thank you. Thanks, Kim. And Donna, final words.
No pressure. +1 on all of those comments. They were amazing. And mine ties in with them as well. So for me, it's really developing a love for learning, because no matter what the future holds, we know it's going to keep changing faster and faster every year. And it means we need to continuously adapt and continuously learn. So, you know, figure out what are the things that I'm interested in, what is it, you know, what's my purpose, what do I wonder, what do I love learning, and really just make sure you surround yourself with those sorts of things, because then it's fun.
Thank you. I'm not too sure whether Pete was having a laugh at us saying it's 6 minutes.
I just want to keep on hearing more from all of you.
Well, I mean, it was amazing, and can I thank Donna and Kim and Yinzhu and Mark. Pete, you pulled together an amazing panel of just different perspectives, but amazing synergies coming from different points of view around the world, but also in the workplace and experiences. And I think that added an amazing richness to the conversation, but also an authenticity to the conversation, because people were talking from their own experience, their own work, their own life experience. And I just think that made it a really good conversation. So I thank you as a panel, a dream to work with, and certainly learnt an awful lot. So I appreciate it. And thank you, Peter, for pulling it together.
You're absolutely, completely welcome. And I second you, Tim, the fantastic panel. Just wonderful to listen to you all. One thing I like to do to end my classes and workshops is to ask the attendees to post in the chat, what's the biggest thing you got from tonight's discussion? You know, if you write it down, you've got more of an opportunity to embed it in your brain and actually take it away with you. So please post your insights in the chat. Well, I once again thank the panelists, Yinzhu Quan, Donna Edwards, Kim Flintoff, Mark Sparvell, and thank you to Dr. Tim McDonald for moderating. Thank you to our attendees, to our audience, for your attendance and your participation. Great to see so much happening in the chat and in the Q&A. We do have 2 more events coming up in the next week and a half. So we've got another panel discussion coming up on schools of the future next Wednesday, 2nd of September. And if you want to see our startups pitch, come along to our EdTech Demo Day this Thursday, 27th of August. I'll post the web address in the chat there. Thank you to the Future Minds Accelerator startups for being here tonight. Thank you so much to Meredith Rowe for bringing together this amazing panel. Enormous thanks to Jacqueline from Venture Cafe Sydney for staying up very late to host us here in this virtual space, and, you know, extending us until midnight tonight on the East Coast. And to my team at Blue Chili, to the team at Rio Tinto and AWS, thank you so much for your support and for your work behind the scenes to make this event amazing as it was.